All right, so I have made not one, but two 5 awesome dungeon loadouts videos, and if you're looking for the best of the best builds, you're probably going to want to watch that. But no, don't go anywhere. Don't go anywhere. I wanted to cover some builds that weren't A tier, they weren't B tier, but they were still fun enough to try. For example, you can just look at the loadouts here, but I'm going to explain everything that we're going to talk about later. Like Bloodfinder AC is not something I'd ever immediately recommend, but, you know, we're going to get into it. We're going to get into it. So, I want to talk about a couple of things. First and foremost, we are talking about Carbide for the third time this video. We're going to save him until the end. It is probably the best hero for dungeons in the game, kinda, because of the fact that there are a lot of different ways to play. I'm personally a speedrunner. I know that the most efficient way to get gold and tickets out of dungeons is to go through as fast as possible. If you're interested in that kind of playstyle, link down below. That has its own set of loadouts that are specifically good for that if you're running in a team. And then there are like really good, well-rounded builds where I don't have a minigun. Actually, you know what? I probably do still have my minigun built because this is from last season. Sub Commando Jonesy is the guy that I use. Commando Spitfire is the exact same. This is just a all-in minigun build, but if you add like the Shockwave dude to make you go faster, Archetype Havoc, this can just make you a little bit quicker, and that can speed things along. Minigun is insanely powerful for mini boss damage, monolith damage, crowd clearing. It's really, really good for dungeons, and that's just awesome. But this doesn't apply to minigun unless you're using diecast in the lead. Rio got added to the game. So if you've already seen my videos on the Carbide, we'll talk about that, but two new updates came around. She came around to buff his damage by 20%. We also have confirmation. I'll show some footage on screen that Bang and Pow from Raven does actually buff Carbide now. I use Breakbeat Wildcat as a substitute for Raven in this build right here because they have the exact same stats, and you can see we're doing about 35-ish thousand damage, and then with Raven in the support in this other clip, we're doing about 40-odd thousand damage. So he is increasing the damage. They have the exact same stats. The hero can't be it, so there you go. Raven actually does help. So if you're trying to use Bang and Pow, the, you know, ability that buffs damage by, you know, 25%, it should help now. So yeah, the last disclaimer I want to make before we get into it is I'm recording everything in the 88 zones of Crypts. That is specifically because you only ever have to actually run the 140 zones once, and that's for these quests right here. I have done none of them this season, so I can show you. There's a quest for running each of the individual zones in 140 plus. That is, to my knowledge, the only time power level actually matters, and the rewards don't change. So I'm recording everything in the 88 zones because that's kind of where you should be at anyway, so it doesn't really matter. And it also goes to show that because I'm solo in all of my gameplay, I ran a poll on stream. Most people are running in a team, so everything you're going to see in today's video, just scale up the damage in your head, because if you're running with other people, you're going to do a lot more damage. So let's kick it off with the first build that I'm actually pretty excited to show you guys. Goin Constructor got updated recently to where you can now take away the ability when you're done with it, which I don't use too much in this gameplay here, but it also adds a little bit of armor. I'll show the image on screen, and I'll link the video down below where I talk about the update, but we are showing a Goin Constructor build, and this thing is interesting. So first and foremost, you're very slow. You're not going to be able to use Goin Constructor the entire time. The cooldown is pretty significant, but those are essentially its only drawbacks. Goin Constructor does a ton of damage against mini bosses. It annihilates the monoliths. It destroys crowds of zombies. So if you're running with other people who are maybe speedrunning to the end of the dungeon, you know, making things go a little quicker, if you're running with a minigunner or somebody else who has a quicker cooldown ability taking out the other monoliths, you can be the guy who comes in for the mini bosses and whatever monoliths might have gotten skipped. So it's maybe not the most essential build ever, but it is useful, and there is a challenge to run a constructor. So if you need one good loadout for a single time use, this Black Knight Garridan build is really neat for Goin Constructor. So let's get into it. Black Knight Garridan is, for all intents and purposes, currently the only constructor in the game that actually buffs Goin Constructor, and that's only because Goin Constructor can now trigger kinetic overload with him in the lead. That essentially just does a bit of extra base energy damage. It's not a ton, but it is damage. And in our support might actually be a potentially better lead, and that's Director Riggs, because he increases the duration of Goin Constructor by up to 10 seconds in support and up to 20 seconds in the lead. And that extra 10 seconds matters a lot in dungeons, so Director Riggs might be more necessary, especially since we're running lower zones in my gameplay at least, so you might not even need that kinetic overload. Regardless, you can kind of swap this around as you see fit. And we're also running maximum overload from Steel Wool Sid. I believe he's a base game hero, I'm not 100% sure, but yeah, you get extra damage, 50% damage on the kinetic overload. So if you're not running kinetic overload in the lead, if you're not running Black Knight Garridan, you can probably swap out Sid here in the support, and then you can put on a couple of other heroes. Let's get into what they might be in a second here. This is a hybrid build. I decided to run this as a decoy build as well. Whenever the decoy finishes, he gives you a nice 51 base damage, which does actually eliminate the enemies, and it's actually really, really effective. And I did a little bit of math. So there is a constructor in the game right here, going. If you want to run Sentinel Hype, she will extend the duration of your decoy by 1.5 seconds. I did the math, though, and Controller Harper takes it by 17%, and that gives you 1.56 more seconds of decoy usage, I should say. So instead of increasing the duration by 1.5 seconds with a normal cooldown, she reduces the cooldown. And it's actually kind of okay if the decoy doesn't last as long, because the explosion happens after it goes away. So it kind of makes sense that you'd want it to stick around for as little as possible. However, there is one more hero that you might be wanting to consider, and that is the I'm just not user-friendly, and that deals 15 base damage every time the enemies attack it. That comes from Kyle the 13th. So if you're not looking to use that kinetic overload, which, like I said, might not be needed, and that's completely fine because you're still doing plenty of damage to the monolith. It's actually the decoy that does more damage than you'd think to the enemies around you. I also found that Bull Rush is really good against those monoliths. So if you want to use Constructor Penny and decrease that Bull Rush cooldown by 27%, she could be a really good alternative in this support because the Bull Rush did more to the monoliths than I honestly figured. Woo! All right, lot to talk about with Goin Constructor. A pretty versatile build. It's surprisingly good for what it is. But we're going to talk about a Shockwave build. Now, this is one that I've always wanted to cover, and you're kind of going to see why not. Let's talk about a couple of advantages right away. Shock Trooper Renegade reduces the cooldown to about a 7-second wait, and Escape Artist in support, Archetype Havoc coming back up, is one of my favorite heroes for dungeons because he just increases your speed when you Shockwave, and all the minigunners have the Shockwave, or at least Commando Spitfire does, which is the minigun that we always use. And with an 8-second uptime on this, you can just essentially get infinite Shockwave, which is great. So if you have a 7-second cooldown and an 8-second ability, you will always be going 40% faster, which is really cool. However, this build kind of lacks constant uptime, like for monolith damage, so you really need that minigun stuff. I've got Going Again in support, which is the same sub-commando guy that we showed earlier, and I have Boomstick, which Diecast Jonesy is super nice for buffing that damage by 25%. If I were going to run this build seriously, I'd probably put all of these support perks in a minigun build. I think that would be a lot more practical, but Shock Trooper Renegade for that cooldown is really nice, potentially in support, might be where he belongs. But one of the things I wanted to point out was Bunny Brawler Luna, and these 3 eggs are kind of nice for monolith damage. It's not huge. I wanted to try it out. She might be more effective in the lead, but this was more for funsies, just trying to try something out. I think minigun is just way too strong, and since you're already dealing with heroes that have miniguns, it's a little hard to sell on the Shockwave part. So you can kind of decide for yourself. The other hero I used was Onslaught Headhunter, who is very wrongly named nowadays because she no longer gives you any headshot damage, but this is 2019 stuff I'm talking about. She reduces the energy cost. I think she's a must if you're going to be running Shockwave all the time, but yeah, you can fiddle with this all you want, and you can check out my Shockwave video, link down below, if you want to see like all the good heroes for it. I do make a specific Shockwave only build, not a hybrid, in that video, and that could help you tweak this build, but it was just something I wanted to try. All right. The one I talked about in the beginning, we're going to be talking about Bloodfinder AC. This is not a top build. This is not something I would seriously recommend. But if you want to try it out, it might be the only time that Bloodfinder AC is actually useful. And he increases the anti-material charge damage by 225%. That does a pretty decent amount to the monoliths. It cleaves through enemies, and that's pretty much it. It's not going to do a ton of damage to a single target. You're not going to be topping the DPS charts in terms of, taking out that Mist monster or that mini boss, but it was pretty good for the monoliths, so it could free up your teammates. And it's just so worked out to where Blast from the Past works pretty much the best with him because the only cooldown that you receive with anti-material charge is how much energy you have. So Saurian Focus, constantly regenerating it, is really nice. Fuel for the Fallen is constantly something that's going to be active as long as you're getting kills. And I want to mention that the gameplay you're seeing, I wasn't actually using Fallen Leverager Jonesy. I wanted to try out Dennis. I figured, well, we're kind of low on health in this build. We're kind of low on energy. What if we tried Burgers? I was not wildly impressed. It did not seem extremely convenient or consistent, and you might find this to be a really good perk. I wasn't sold on it. So one thing I might suggest is that Saurian Focus and Fuel for the Fallen might be a little overkill. So if you want to swap this for another perk, you can absolutely go ahead and do that. One of the heroes that came up in the stream chat when I was checking this out was Valkyrie Rio. She gives you knockback, and I don't really think that's super useful because you're already killing the enemies that you're attacking, so maybe you can stagger a mini-boss. I am not seriously somebody who has ever respected impact, especially in dungeons, but if you want to find a hero in here that's helpful, it's definitely okay. And then Archaeologist is, of course, because you're spamming heavy attacks, so if you want to just make that as cheap as possible, you're definitely going to need Archaeologist and support. And then lastly, we get to use Jurassic Ken. Yes, he actually does buff anti-material charge, and this is the only legitimate use I've ever seen for him. So if you want to do 20% more damage, that is definitely something you can do. And if he's buffing ability damage by 20%, then that might count for like extraterrestrial Rio. However, we are not using a shield in this build with Blast from the Past, so you can't use her and Ken in the same build, but I figured I should mention it anyway. All right, this is a build that I'm just showing to appease the masses. I don't even think they are the masses, but every single time I've ever recorded a Dungeons video, Swamp Knight gets brought up. And after using him, I don't know why. You get Swamp Knight pretty early on. If you just run Crypts and then run it a couple more times, I think you can get him from dungeons right away. And he's pretty great for eliminating enemies. It's kind of awesome because anytime any enemy attacks you, they die. And if you're running this in a really low zone like I am, it's actually pretty effective. So effective that I might even not suggest running Bomb Suit. I don't even think it's necessary. So you might want to run a perk that ups like melee damage or something, because you can see that this is really good at crowd clearing, but when the minigun is gone, that is the last chance you're going to have to destroy that monolith today, and it's a very, very slow build. So if you're kind of newbie in dungeons and you just want to stay alive, maybe you can help clear the crowd with your teammates while they run a better loadout for attacking monoliths, but this is not going to be doing a lot of damage to those monoliths, or any really at all. And it's not going to be doing a lot of damage to the mini-bosses. But if you run this with Trick and Treat, you have a 50% chance to conjure a Phantasm that will give you Life Leech. And that just eliminates enemies really, really well. Pairs with Swamp Knight really nicely because you do extra damage to the Mist monsters. And when you take damage, it summons those Phantasms. So it not only does damage, but heals you. So you never really have to actually attack the enemies. And ironically, I wanted to report, I'm going to move my face real quick here, that we got some new heroes for this team perk, but none of them help. Raven now affects it. Sanguine Dusk now affects it. We got the Smoke Bomb guy now affects it. And I double checked, thanks to Archer in the stream chat, the last one is Night Stalker. There's just Dire. And Dire could be nice. I would recommend Dire in dungeons, but I'm pretty certain that this just is never active. Everybody in the chat is telling me that this never is active, which is so sad because Dungeons is A, the exact same event time frame as Dire being released, and B, it's night. It's night. Why he wouldn't constantly be active, I don't know. I'm pretty sure the players would greatly enjoy a 25% movement buff, so I'm just going to go ahead with Warcry duration because an extra 3 seconds on his Warcry is great. That does increase your attack speed, so your melees can break those monoliths faster, and it buffs your minigun, so it's a win-win. And it buffs your teammates, so it's a win-win-win. And yeah, Bomb Suit, like I said, kind of questionable. You don't need it. And then, of course, the same two minigun guys that I used earlier because his minigun is the only way you're doing any meaningful damage to those monoliths. Lastly, I am using Willow. I'm pretty sure the Phantasms don't count as an ability damage, but hopefully I'm wrong. And if you're low on health, which you never really will be, then it'll buff minigun. Like I said, none of these really help Swamp Knight, so maybe I could suggest like Monster Smash or something to maybe buff melee. I don't know. It's just disappointing that all these Trick and Treat perks do not really help Swamp Knight. So to everybody who's recommended that I use this hero, I don't know what you're coming from. If I got this all wrong and there's a way better way to run Swamp Knight, comment down below. I'd love to hear it. I'll heart it. I'll thumb it up so people can see it, but I'm not really sold. All right, that was a lot of for fun builds. Let's get into the good stuff. Carbide is insane. The gameplay that I got for him is half the length of all the others because I finished it too quickly, and Carbide's nuts. Let's get into it quick. He has Zip and Zap. Lefty and righty can bounce around doing energy damage. It's insanely powerful, and they cause affliction. Happy Holidays reduces the cooldown. Pump Metal is the Art Deco hero Noir. He ups the duration by 10 seconds as long as you get those kills. He also has Bang and Pow, which now actually does meaningful damage and support, so you get that 25% bonus. You also get Resonant Frequency, one of the brand new heroes, Extraterrestrial Rio. She is not new, but she got her perk updated. So now energy damage will do 20% more while your shields are full. You know, Carbide did not need a damage buff, but I'll take it. Absolutely stunning is Dashing Hawk. He comes from the Easter event, so, you know, you're not going to really, well, Easter and, you know, the romantic one, Valentine's Day, kind of the same period, but he has a chance to stun enemies, and that does work on mini bosses, and it does help. It's a very, very useful perk. And then lastly, we have space technology. So yeah, I mean, just another 15.5% if you want it. If this is too much damage, which I don't blame you, there are nice things like Archetype Havoc. Yes, we do have a Shockwave, so why not make you go 40% faster? You do not need the amount of damage that you're getting from this, but if you feel that you want it, there you go. And not to mention, all of the gameplay in this video is from the crypts, because I haven't unlocked Labyrinth yet, but Labyrinth is a very tight quarters building, just a lot of 1x1 rooms. It's not the entire Labyrinth, but it will bounce way more in the Labyrinth, and when you get there, just try out this build. Trust me, it's amazing. So yeah, if you guys want to check out my other videos on dungeons, I'd appreciate it. I didn't realize that I left my cam in the middle of the screen for the rest of the video, so I hope you enjoyed that. And if you guys want to support the channel, feel free to use code Mista to check out. I support Archer, but if you want to support me, that's cool too. You guys do whatever you want. Thank you guys so much for watching. Check out the videos linked down below. I'll see you guys in the next one. And then